Yo, what's happening? Coast to Coast podcast from InsideCarolina.com. Right back at you. We are brought to you by Johnny T-Shirt. Thanks for being here. Joey Powell joining me as always, Sherrell, McMillan, Sean Moran. Coast to Coast from Inside Carolina. We're glad you're here. We're glad you have downloaded and or watching this show either on YouTube or listening maybe in the traditional podcast format. Either way, we're glad that we're in your rotation. We hope that you're getting something out of the show and just hope that you're having a good day when and wherever you're getting a hold of this here podcast. We got a lot to talk about. Hasn't been a lot of action on the hardwood. North Carolina played UConn and lost since we last spoke with you. So we'll talk about that a little bit. And then we'll talk a little bit about the big game with Kentucky coming up. And then we'll look a little bit into what the ACC might look like because after this exam break, y'all, it is full speed ahead. Tar Heels will be playing full on into the season grind right after this. They've got the little exam break and some reading days, and a decent gap in between UConn and Kentucky. But I guess first things first, Sean, I'll come to you. I saw North Carolina show a lot of moxie and a lot of grit in a game against UConn, in which I realized just how good UConn is. Was your takeaway similar? And again, I always know you love the offensive efficiency numbers, and I swear to God, I felt like UConn was like 2 points per possession at some point during that game. But what were your takeaways having seen the defending champs host the Tar Heels in the Garden last week?
I think this time last week I was pretty adamant that UNC was going to come away with a win, and I think looking at that was looking at a UConn team that was very talented, but also a team that is young and trying to reinvent itself from that championship performance last year. But it turns out that the guys that were on the team last year have stepped up and have still kept that efficiency that they had last year in bigger minutes, and the newcomers. Maybe not Jordan Hawkins level, but it certainly felt like that. Watching the team play last week, so I was completely wrong on UConn, and we'll see how the Kentucky game goes. But I think watching it and then rewatching it had some different opinions. Watching it live, I felt really it was the first 4 minutes. I felt like UNC was the better team, and they were more prepared in that very beginning. But you could also see UConn just how they're what they do every game through that motion offense is they're going to develop easy shots, some good looks around the basket, some open threes. They weren't hitting a lot of the open threes in the first half. And then I felt UNC maintained until the 12-minute timeout. And then really from that point on, it was UNC trying to catch up. And I think we saw this a lot last year where UNC was a better team and they would have that 5 to 9 point lead and they would give it up and let the game get away. Whereas UConn let it get down to 5 and then they answered very strongly. So overall, I mean, UConn extremely impressive. They're just going to continue to get better, especially as their young guys get more experience. And I think from a coaching perspective, their offense is pretty much like UVA's defense. That it's just going to it's going to force the other team to make mistakes. And I think from a general standpoint, UNC played well. RJ Davis really, could not have played much better in the second half. But what Sherrell basically wrote and alluded to right after the game is they're going to need to find other consistent scores outside of, I'll call it the big two of RJ and Harrison Ingram, because they've been the two that have played at that consistently high level all year. Obviously, Armando will be there, but he needs to, he didn't have a great performance from a shooting perspective. He did from an assist perspective. And then who are going to be those guys that come along for the ride? We know Cadeau will. Every game he continues to get better, but you could see he struggled a little bit with the physicality and with how UConn played defense. So who's going to be the bench and how are the other guys going to compete with RJ and Harrison Ingram going forward?
And we talked a little bit about before UNC got into the kind of getting to the meat of the season, that they would struggle on defense with teams that had big guards. And if I'm not mistaken, the next team they'll see in Kentucky has big guards. I do want to give you a little bit of props, Sean, in a sense that you made the comment going into that game about what Alex Caravan did would probably be a good watermark for how UConn did. And I know Cam Spencer and and Tristan Newton are the flash, but I'm going to go ahead and tell you, Alex Caravan had a hell of a night. I think he put up really strong shooting numbers. He was absolutely cutting North Carolina to death, on those wing cuts, and UNC really just didn't have a ton of things to stop him. And when they did, there were other guys that were feasting on that.
I
Sherrell,
mean, I think
go ahead.
I think a perfect, it felt like UNC was down more early in the first half, but all of a sudden they're tied at 23, and you could tell UConn wasn't playing well. UNC puts together a tremendous defensive possession, and like Caravan makes a cut with 2 seconds left on the shot clock and hits a little runner to go up 25-23. And I think you know, UConn is they continued to push no matter what time, and at some point they're banking on the defense breaking down with all their movement and action, and that was a perfect example at a pretty important time because UNC never got closer after that.
Sherrell, I got the sense there was a lot of angst from the fan base about, and I don't want to say from a majority of the fan base, there was a lot of angst from the fan base about losing to UConn. And I think we're at this place where, fans are going to fan. A lot of people will make the comments about moral victories and so on and so forth. I don't think that playing the way they did against UConn was a moral victory for North Carolina, but I do think there were still some positives to be taken away from that game. Were there anything were there any things that you saw that you feel like bode well for the rest of the season? And are there things that you saw that could potentially continue to be, you know, oblique moments for this team that might be kind of a fatal flaw even?
I think it's a little bit of both, especially when you talk about playing teams like Kentucky, Oklahoma. They have in a couple weeks, and then really getting into the ACC slate after what you would hope is a tune-up with Charleston Southern. I think we're seeing the bench minutes start to decrease, which you would expect in a game like UConn. I think the key is going to be for games against teams not at UConn's level, and even not at Kentucky's level. So not picking on anybody, but just a Pittsburgh, a NC State, a Clemson, a Syracuse, will we see the same kind of bench usage in those games? Because it's totally understandable to really cut down on the bench, especially in the second half against UConn, because they're a really good team, and you want to have who you think are your best players out there. And that difference between what your best players can bring and what your bench players bring could be the difference in winning and losing against a team like UConn. Against some of those other schools, maybe that's not the case. So that's one thing I think to look out for. Two, RJ Davis, continues to be on a tear. Can he keep that up? We've talked about how he's been freed up a little bit, and Sean has done breakdowns. Adrian's done breakdowns about just how good he is at shooting off the catch and kind of just being a scorer. So can he keep that up? And I think he can. I mean, again, UConn is the best team that UNC will play in the regular season the rest of the year. And, before the teams they played before, the teams they play the rest of the year. That's the best team they're going to play. Period. And he had a really dynamic offensive performance against them. On the flip side, I think you know kind of wondering about exactly if Armando Bacot is hurt, if he's just not playing as aggressively as he hopes to, if he doesn't have, I think he called it a trash man mentality last year, if he doesn't have that still. Kind of wonder what's going on with him and if he can kind of rebound a little bit and get back to being kind of the efficient rebounder that he needs to be. He doesn't have to be the guy anymore, I think, with this particular team. And Sean, I'm going to ask you about that in a second, but he doesn't have to be the guy to score 25 points and bring down 20 run rebounds anymore like he did at some points last year when they just didn't have any other way to score. I think this team, with Harrison Ingram's versatility and with Godot's new ability to get into the paint and finish or dish, and then you hope that Cormac Bryant can hit the shots, you just don't expect Armando Bacot to have to carry so much of the offensive load. And I wonder if there's going to be some time spent at UNC talking about that, and that maybe the team is better off if I don't want to say not going to him every possession, but just being more freewheeling and not kind of forcing it in there. So Sean, what do you think about that? Like, is UNC at a point where Armando doesn't have to be the guy he was last year?
I think that goes to the big two comment earlier of it's really RJ as the top scorer and Harrison Ingram who's been playing at that high level. I think from Armando's perspective, from rebounding, I think they still do need that because they don't have the big bodies in that starting lineup. But I think offensively, I mean, we've seen it over the years, and I think Kentucky will be another interesting case now that Bradshaw has 2 games under his belt, and he's 7'1" and lanky and a shot blocker, and we know Armando usually struggles with size and that type of body, although he might be able to use his strength against him. But I think for Armando, probably an ideal game has to be shooting over 50%, where he's converting some of those dump offs, the easy baskets that we continue to see him get. I would love to, I think if UNC is throwing him the ball, it's usually on that right block, and he's going to turn, over his left shoulder towards the baseline for a hook. If he's not getting a layup, would love to see what they did against Arkansas, of trying to get him a easier look if he gets good position on that left block. But I also wouldn't mind seeing him on that left block where he's turning towards the middle for a short hook shot. I think if he can avoid that left-handed hook that he did, and we've seen a lot of hooks where he's been fading away. I think if we can avoid those types of shots, that will help his percentage. But I think if he can be that third scoring option, but at the same time, be finishing a little better around the rim, I think that's ideal. Then it goes to probably the next question of who's that fourth guy.
And since we're talking about Kentucky and Bacot, I want to be fair to him. The last time they played Kentucky, no one wants to ever remember that game ever again in the history of life. But the only bright spot for UNC was Armando Bacot. I mean, he was going up against Oscar Tshiebwe, and he, dominated for, I don't want to say the whole game, but at least part of the first half. And he had a lot of points, a lot of rebounds. It was really the only one who brought, anything up the entire game. So I want to give him credit on that. Tshiebwe, I think, was a more proven defender and shot blocker than Aaron Bradshaw. So I do want to give him credit there, because there have been times where he struggles with length, but that wasn't one of them. So we can get more into Kentucky, but I just wanted to recall that game, because I know everybody has buried that game because it was so bad. But Bacot was the lone bright spot for UNC, and that was 2 years ago.
Yeah, so let's ease into that a little bit. Sean, what were we going to say?
I was going to say, and there's we talked earlier. He had 5 assists in the game, and I did like when they did get him in space and the decision making he did show. One was Cormac Ryan's back cut, where he had a perfect pass, and then the other was when he had the ball, took a dribble to the free throw line and hit Ingram for cutting for a layup. So I wouldn't mind seeing him in space. I don't think you want him, making too many of those decisions, but I think he can draw the defense out a little bit. Not to mention not have to deal with a double team at that space, and that can allow some of the other players potentially to move and get easier opportunities.
So yeah, let's kind of continue on to the previewing of UK. I think I think a lot of folks, will probably recognize that they lost to Kansas. Okay, nothing wrong with that. They lost at home to UNCW, which Calipari actually played there for 2 years, I believe. But I want to start digging into that a little bit. We talked earlier and mentioned briefly on this show about how this North Carolina squad will deal with big guards, and I think you're going to see a lot of Wagner and Reeves on Saturday. With Reeves is 6'6", just long wingspan. Wagner 6'4", and even Bob Billingham is 6'3". So North Carolina's be dealing with a little bit of size there. Sherrell, do you anticipate that being an issue for Cadeau and Davis, or is this one of those things where North Carolina's ability to score should be able to kind of at least keep them neck and neck with what Kentucky wants to do?
Yeah, I think it's going to come down to one thing. I don't mean to be super simplistic, but if Kentucky's making open shots, I don't know that there's a path to victory for UNC, because they're such a prolific 3-point shooting team, which is a big change for Kentucky. They have 3 guys right now shooting like above 45%. I'm going to pull it up real quick, but Dillingham is 19 of 37. That's 51% from 3 this season. Antonio Reeves is 25 of 58. That's 43% this season. And Reed Shepherd is 23 of 39. That's 59% this season. So those 3 guys, if they get open looks like UConn was getting. Now, UConn runs a lot of different motion and sets and everything to get their guys looks, and I don't think Kentucky necessarily does that. They try to just use their natural athleticism and skill to get by you. But if they're able to get those open looks, it could be a rough night for UNC. I think what you look for Carolina is to, and it's part of the reason Carolina's been giving up so many easy twos, I think, this year, because it seems like the defense is geared towards not allowing 3-point shooters to really go off on them. Let's say they're really hugging that 3-point line a lot. And in Kentucky's 2 losses, to your point, Joey, to Kansas and to UNCW, they were 17 of 55 from 3, which is about 30%. So, again, not to be simplistic, but it's like if Kentucky doesn't make their shots, I think Carolina has a great chance. If Kentucky is hitting at their averages, I don't know if there's a path to victory for UNC.
I mean, I think in terms of Kentucky, almost a similar profile, very strong offensively, defensively. They're a little lower than UNC, I think, in the 50s. So I think that bodes well. They are taller. This team, height wise, yes, athletic. Probably the most athletic team they'll face all year. Just with the skill of the freshman guards that Kentucky has with Dillingham, Wagner, and Reed Shepherd, who was kind of the forgotten one, and now has played himself into. I'm seeing him as a top 10 pick in mock drafts right now. But I think really they won't have to worry about being pounded down low like a Villanova or even UConn to a certain extent. And then I think from a 3-point percentage, they're shooting the lights out, but you had Reeves go 3 for 17 against Kansas, and they struggled against UNC Wilmington. So who is getting those shots and how contested are they? And then when they are missing, are they able to keep them off the boards? Because UConn was able to, at very key times, almost pull what UNC usually does with some tap outs or getting the loose balls. And there's nothing worse than playing good defense and getting those possessions extended when you need to be going on the offensive end.
Yeah, and stats don't always tell the entire story, right? Like I think, occasionally there will be a team that looks more to the eye test than their stats do. But one of the things statistically that I am going to look at, and I think will be potentially an opportunity for North Carolina, is that Kentucky doesn't go to the free throw line very often. They're averaging, 13 free throws a game. It's not. That's not something that I think North Carolina is. I don't know that it's necessarily suited for North Carolina, but if it's something where they do get to the line a lot more than Kentucky does, and they're able to make their free throws, that's another place you can find some baskets, and that's one of the reasons they were able to keep up with UConn early in that last game was that UConn's threes weren't falling, and North Carolina was scoring from the free throw line, and that can certainly wash out sometimes and find you some, I guess, some hidden points in a box score. Guys, I love that we talked about Bacot and Sheway's go round last time. Sean, I want to ask you, what do you think Bradshaw adds to Kentucky? I mean, he's officially played 2 games now. You mentioned his length earlier. What does he do that makes this Kentucky team more dangerous, I guess?
I think going back to the summer, the question was, is he gonna suit up? And he certainly has, just playing 13 minutes and 29 minutes. But offensively, he offers one, a lob threat. So if the Kentucky guards are going to get a step and get into the paint, that's going to be easy baskets for them. He does have some offensive skill. I wouldn't mind seeing him. If he's the one shooting threes or Edwards, that's fine. Even though I think Bradshaw can hit them, but if he's floating around the perimeter, that leaves him outside of the lane. And then defensively, just with that size and how he moves, he's going to be a heck of a talent, especially once he starts to get his sea legs under him. So I think in this game, you know, Lively presented a problem for Bacot because he knew how to play. Bacot just he waited for Bacot to initiate the contact, and then he didn't foul and he went straight up. I think in this game, third game in for Bradshaw, Bacot can probably use some of that strength to his advantage and try to get the young guy in foul trouble. But it definitely gives Kentucky much more of a presence around the rim defensively as well as some stuff that they haven't had in a while offensively, just with that size and length.
Sherrell, are you buying or selling that Armando Bacot can probably use the young guy a little bit early on? And to Bacot's credit, while he has not been providing the points I think that folks were expecting out of him every night in and every night out, he does seem that he's done a little better against size this year. So are you buying or selling that Armando can go a little old man education on Aaron Bradshaw when the heels and cats lock up?
Oh yeah, 100% buying. I mean, Bradshaw is a good player. Don't get me wrong, but there's still a lot of potential just kind of baked into the projection of what he might do the rest of the season. And this will only be his third game, even though they are going to be coming off of a little bit of a break. It's only his third game, and facing someone like Armando Bacot, who's been around the block and like you said, has that old man strength, it's going to be a challenge for him. And I don't even know how much he's going to play. Like he'll play some, but they have other options. Like Trey Mitchell is a strong guy. He'll be in there some. Thoreau will be in there some. So they have bodies. That's the only one that's I would say comparable to Bacot as far as height and size. So they'll throw different bodies at him. But the UNC staff also has to do a good job of getting Bacot. I think he does well when they get him the ball on the move. He's not he can get the ball in the post, dribble 3 times, and throw up a hook shot, but I don't know if that's the best way to use him. And you've seen the UNC staff at times, they've done that, where they've got him on the move, let him get a couple of dribbles so he can get into his spin, and that kinda thing offensively. So, I would look for them to do that with him. I think Elliot Cadeau will be important, to again, like Sean said, while the guards for Kentucky are very dynamic offensively, there is still a little bit to be desired defensively. I think over at Inside Kentucky is not a site, but if it was, they would be having some of the same discussions about the backcourt and the defense with the young guards that we're having about UNC's backcourt right now. So, Dillingham and Shepard are freshmen too. So
Mhm.
there's a chance for, I think, RJ Davis to have a really good game against them. So strength and weaknesses, I don't think these teams are that different, like Sean said, honestly. They're built very similar. And then the other matchup, I know he's asking about Bacot, but I'm just kind of rambling through matchups. But
No worries.
if Harrison Ingram plays a good deal of 3 this game, on Saturday, and he's facing Antonio Reeves, I think that's a matchup that USC can exploit because Ingram, is strong and big and older. Reeves is tall and older, but he doesn't have the strength that Ingram has. It could be a situation where, you play through Ingram in the post, especially when Reeves is the cover. Now, if they switch to Edwards or some of the other guys who have more athleticism, then you might have to pivot. But Reeves is getting the bulk of the minutes for Kentucky at the 3, so that's one thing to watch out for.
I mean, I'll just jump in real quick. I would say I would love to just keep seeing Ingram on that block as he backs down until they prove that, hey, either Edwards can defend this with his athleticism, but if he doesn't have the strength, or there's somebody smaller like Reeves, keep taking advantage of either Ingram getting those good looks or being able to pass out. I think for me, one of the things, I'm looking, for Reed Shepherd, I think his defense has been highlighted in terms of how good his hands have been on ball defense. Are they putting him on Davis to start? Then how does that look like on a senior versus freshman? But Reed Shepherd defensively is one that I'll be seeing who they match up with. And I think if they do find a weak spot, I would love to see them attack more on it, almost, not strictly isolation, but kind of, the NBA style of, hey, we're going to play this guy off the court. And I think they should have done that more against UConn with Cam Spencer, because when they did attack him, whether it was Cormac Ryan one time off the dribble or back cuts or Ingram, and they were getting baskets. Unfortunately, he was torching them on the other end, and would have loved to seen them go at him more from an offensive perspective. I don't think anybody's going to be like that on Kentucky, but just in the future of being able to take advantage of things like that.
Definitely will be fun to watch. I think you should take the over if you care about that type of information in your life, because I do think there's going to be a lot of points scored. And it will be interesting to see what North Carolina is able to find against such an athletic team. I think there were times in the last year or two where North Carolina struggled against teams that had superior athleticism. And if we've known anything about Cal's teams over the recent past, they're going to throw some athletes at you. And as Sherrell said earlier, this might be the most athletic team that North Carolina sees on their schedule.
That's where the schedule that they played so far, I think, helps them a good bit. Florida
Yeah.
State is always an athletic team. Arkansas is always an athletic team. Villanova has athletes. I don't know if I would consider them a complete athletic team, but they have athletes. And then obviously UConn, I think they have some athletic players. They're more about precision and efficiency and those things, but it's not like um, there weren't athletes on the floor. So this is where the schedule, I think, helps you in that I don't think they'll be surprised by Kentucky's speed. Now, Kentucky will probably there'll be some times where Kentucky takes advantage of it, but it won't be shocking to them because they played comparable, at least comparable um, teams with athleticism to start the season.
So, Cheryl, one of the things you said a minute ago when you were talking about Armando Bacot was that he's been around the block a little bit. And I'm wondering if that block is East Franklin Street and Chapel Hill. Because if he's been around that block, then no doubt he's walked into Johnny T-Shirt once or twice. Johnny T-Shirt, big sponsors of this show, of Inside Carolina content. And they are right there on East Franklin Street and Chapel Hill. If you are in town for any reason, go by and check them out. Parents, if you're coming to pick up your kids from the end of the semesters, they're finishing up their finals and you're bringing them home for the holidays or whatnot, go by. The Johnny T-Shirt folks have the 12 days of Christmas going on right now. And you can get something different. They're marking different things down every day for 12 days leading up to the 25th. So check them out, support them. If you have a Tar Heel fan in your life and you are unsure what to buy them, get up with Johnny T-Shirt. They'll take care of you. They'll help you find, the stuff that you need. They will also probably help you fill up that list. If you don't know who to shop for, go tell them. Let some of their very intelligent, educated, knowledgeable staff get you hooked up with whatever it is that you're shopping for that Tar Heel fan in your life. We appreciate Johnny T-Shirt sponsoring this and hope that you will show your support by shopping there. All right, take a break. National ads, you know the drill. We'll be right back. Talk a little ACC preseason. Thanks for sticking around. Coast to Coast Podcast. I'm Joey Powell. Sean Moran, Sherrell McMillan with me as always. Appreciate them being here. We've talked a little bit about North Carolina against UConn. We've previewed the match against Kentucky coming up in Atlanta. I think now we've also had enough games going on in the league where we can actually discuss a little bit what the ACC season might look like. So I'm going to throw out a couple of nuggets and let you guys slide on down to that. While I'm looking at those stats, Sherrell, something about Armando you want to mention before we get into the preview of the ACC season?
Yeah, I do think the fan base and maybe the media have been tough on him. I mean, he's a fifth-year senior, so it's all warranted. I think there are parts of his game that they need improvement. However, he's still rebounding at a super elite clip. And I think the cynical people will say, well, he's missing shots and he's getting, bunnies as rebounds and putting them back.
They absolutely do say that, by the way.
Yeah, defensive rebound percentage, he's 4th in the country. So he's the only one, and I don't mean this as a negative to anybody else in Carolina's team, but he's the only one really rebounding for UNC right now. And so I guess I would say, yes, he can do better around the rim, but he also is keeping UNC kind of in games, and he's the only one rebounding for the team right now. They're not rebounding as a team. It's kind of, if Armando doesn't get it, then UNC likely doesn't get it. So while there's some things that need improvement, he's still doing that very, very well.
Yeah. So as we talked a second ago, North Carolina with the game against UConn will have a game against UConn, game against Kentucky. We'll then have a game against Charleston Southern, and I think that's it. And then they're all ACC games after that. Sean, pop quiz. There is one undefeated team in the ACC right now. Who is it?
Clemson.
Are you looking at the stats? Are you cheating? You're a cheating animal, aren't you? Or are you president of the Brad Brownell fan club?
I'm not, but the fact that they Joe Girard as well as PJ Hall, two guys that have been around the block, and I think they had a tough game against South Carolina. I think the big one was the at Alabama win. I can't say outside of that have followed Clemson too closely, but they're at least holding their own, for what they've done in the out of conference, and if UNC is able to get a win against them, that should bode well for the resume, since we're going to be all about the resumes no matter what happens with Kentucky or Oklahoma. I know we'll go there, but yes, I think 9-game win streak, and we'll see if they can finish off against Memphis, an undefeated out of conference schedule.
It
Yeah, I
is
forgot
funny
the
to me.
Oklahoma game. Sorry about that.
No worries. It is funny to me how each game has become a referendum on what might be in the future. So
On the
like
net.
when Clemson is losing in the first half, who they played TCU. When Clemson's
TCU
trailing
this past
TCU in the
weekend.
first
Yeah.
half, it's like, oh, that's gonna drop Carolina's net to
Yeah.
92. And then TCU comes back. It's like Carolina's net's back up to 17. It's like, it's
It's
gonna be
so
frustrating
absurd.
to do this. Yeah, it's gonna be frustrating to do this. And hopefully as the net gets more information, it can be a little more accurate because you look at some of the stuff in it now and it's kind of wild, but hopefully it's one of those formulas that fine tunes itself moving forward. But I
I'm
just
gonna
think
go
that's
ahead
interesting.
go ahead and making a decree on the show mainly because I'm the host. We're not going to talk about the net until February. All right? That's a rule for this show. I think the metric is so stupid and I recognize it's something that they have to use and I appreciate that everybody, gets measured by it, but I am absolutely refusing to talk about the net on this show until February. So we're going to put that to bed now. And Sean's right. It is Clemson. Clemson's the only team in the ACC right now that's 9-0. And the cynic in me, which might shock you, hey, I'm cynical. Clemson does this every year, I feel like. I feel like it's a hallmark of Brad Brownell teams that every season they get out to like this, great record. They jump up in the rankings, get to the mid teens or what have you. And then conference play starts and they absolutely lose their minds. Like they'll drop 6 out of 7. So I don't know that that's going to happen this year, but it does feel like we've had this chair pulled out from under us before with Clemson. But as you look to the rest of the top of the league, most, granted the conference has all only played one conference game, save Wake. They have not played a conference game yet. But most of the teams in the league have at least 2 losses. The only exception being Virginia with 1, and also the undefeated Clemson team I mentioned. But I think what we've seen is that the ACC has played some good games, not only individually. I've seen Syracuse look good at times. I've seen Georgia Tech look really good at times, but I've also seen some head scratchers, and I would like to come to you guys. Do you feel like this league could end up being as strong as we thought it was after watching the SEC challenge, or do we feel like there may be still some underlying issues with how this team or how this league might bear out with some of the teams just being absolute dogs? Sherrell?
Yeah, I think there might be some underlying issues. Miami. So Florida State has struggled at times, but they beat a good Colorado team. But then Miami, who's supposed to be, a lot of people picked them to win the conference. They come out and they get, blown out by Colorado this afternoon, and it's just I don't know. There's some good wins and there's some bad losses, and it just kind of feels like it's going to be just a puddle of mud come February, where there's a whole bunch of teams who are like, 10-5 or something heading down the home stretch, and they're beating each other up. They're knocking each other's. Oh, we can't say that word. They're blank ranking. They're knocking that down each night. Then you got people like Louisville, who's just in a complete anchor on the conference. You beat Louisville by 55, and your blank ranking is still going to go down. So it doesn't look that much different to me. We saw last year Clemson was 14-6 in conference, and I think they won a game in the ACC tournament and still didn't get in. So you're going to have to, if you're UNC, you really need at least 1, 2 would be great of these next 2 non-conference wins to give yourself probably at least 3 Q1 wins from the out of conference schedule. So you kind of need those 2 because if not, I don't know if 14 or even 15 wins in the ACC, it's crazy as it sounds, is going to be enough to get into the tournament. We've seen that the last couple of years. And strength of schedule obviously is a part of it, but I see a lot of the same in the conference. There's not that great 1 or 2 teams. There's a whole bunch of kind of, I would say, between 17 and 30 in the country, type teams.
Sean, do you feel like there's a couple of surprises in the league, or do you still feel like it may be a 5-team tournament league, kind of around what we've seen in the past when there's been bubble squads? Is that certain committees fall in love with certain leagues, mainly the Big Ten and the SEC, I mean, do you feel like there's a couple of solid middle of the pack teams right now that could end up doing some damage, or is this the same question I asked Sherrell? Like, is this just a league of dogs? Is there anybody that catches your eye right now?
I mean, right now you have 4 teams in the top 40, and then I think you almost have the worst case scenario. Even though I think in general right now the ACC is stronger than it has been the past 2 years, but you have the ACC ranked 6th, behind all the other power conferences. You have a few teams dragging it down, not as bad as last year with Louisville, but you have a Louisville, Notre Dame, Florida State that are dragging things down. And then outside of those top 40 teams, everybody else is not going to be considered a good win. But they're very easily losable games, especially on the road, because these teams can, they'll probably knock off UNC one night and then lose to Florida State the next night, a team like Pitt, for instance. So, and not to mention our friends down at Wake Forest and Hunter Salas, I'm sure he'll go off as well. So it's going to be really challenging, knowing that you really can't afford losses, but at the same time, a lot of these teams aren't bad outside of a few, and each game, could end up as a loss. So you need to, each game you need to take seriously, and especially with that 3-game road stanza to open everything up, it's going to be challenging. But no, I don't think anybody's coming out of the woodwork and shocking the ACC or the country. I think it'll be interesting to watch UVA, who got absolutely destroyed by Wisconsin, but that's just their one loss. They've been no surprise playing well. They'll probably only have 2 to 3 ACC losses. So they're probably a team, at least from an ACC perspective, that might exceed expectations. But I think they're projected to be a top 4 team anyway. So um, it's going to be challenging. I think they performed better than they did last year, but it would have been nice to have a few more teams in that upper echelon right now.
I think it's
I
going to
like
be. Go
Wake.
ahead.
I was just gonna say I like Wake Forest. I think they've got some talent. Obviously they've had. I think they've lost 2 or 3 games, but they've all been to Power 5 teams. If I'm correct, I think they lost to Georgia and
But not strong.
uh, yeah, but
Georgia
not
and
strong teams.
LSU.
Right, right. But I think when you're in these games where teams are kind of evenly matched, I go with, okay, who has the most talent, and kind of bet that way, because talent most of the time, not all the time, kind of rises to the front. And I do think between Hildreth and Salas, those are 2 players we think have the capability of being dynamic. I think Hildreth has shown it. I think Salas is beginning to show it. So Wake Forest could be one of those ones from the middle who maybe goes on a little bit of run and surprises some people and makes the NCAA tournament. Just a guess, though.
LSU, LSU, Georgia, and Utah were those losses that Wake has so far this year. But again, all Power 5 teams, and we've seen that LSU's got athleticism. Don't know anything about Utah. I haven't seen them play yet. But to your point, Sherrell, I do think they've shown their coach is able to get them motivated, and they do have enough talent on that roster to potentially do some damage. Anyway, I think the biggest thing for folks that are listening to this to take away from the ACC talk is that um, the league may be kind of meh again this year, but North Carolina absolutely needs to win the games that they should win, right? And we've seen what that could potentially do to them when they're waiting for a tournament invite, or they're pushing their luck. And so, if anything to take away from this early part of the season, I think it would be that, okay, North Carolina has won 7 of their 9. They've looked really good. Haven't really gotten spanked by anybody, which is not something you could say for prior years. And then hopefully when they get into the league, they're probably going to be, to quote Roy Williams, more gifted than most of the teams they play. So remains to be seen if they can continue to keep it up. Of course, they will absolutely drop a couple of games that they shouldn't, which I think just about anybody in the ACC will do. But it's going to be interesting to see how this league plays up against them. Before we get out of here, Sherrell, it's been very quiet on the recruiting front lately. I'd love to hear you and Sean talk a little bit about Koa Pete, because I think he's a fascinating player. But then after that, give us a little bit about why you think things are so quiet around North Carolina and recruiting at this moment.
Yeah, Koa Pete, depending upon the most updated height and weight, is like 6'8" or 6'9", and he's like 215 or 225. So I'm not sure which one, but that's kind of where the updated height and weights are. He's out in Gilbert, Arizona. He goes to Perry High School, and just a dominant, huge, massive, strong, athletic, four. I think he has designs on playing some three, and I think whatever school he goes to will let him do that some. But he also has the ability, because of his strength and his size and his athleticism, to play some small ball five if needed. Um, there's not a lot of holes in his game. I think he's still developing his 3-point shot, but you talk about being able to have someone who can come in day one and is ready for the rigors of ACC or Pac-12 or Big 12 basketball. I think he's it, and he's not even older for his age either. I mean, he's a legit 2025 kid. He's 16 years old. Just comes from a super athletic family. His brother is starting offensive lineman for the Saints. And then his sisters and his other brothers all played either volleyball, basketball, or football. His dad was an athlete. So just a super athletic family. And he's been the only player from 2025 so far to take an official visit to UNC. He was there back at the beginning of November, I think it was, for an official visit. And then UNC's followed up. Sean May was at his game on Friday night. So they are definitely making him a priority. Obviously, when you have someone coming out from the West Coast, you have to think about Arizona, the number one team in the country, who's not far from where he is. And then the UCLAs, the Gonzagas, the USCs, those type of schools who probably be in for it too. And then he's got blue blood offers. He's got Kansas, Kentucky, Duke as well. So it's going to be a battle, but I think so far, he's visited Texas, Michigan, and Carolina officially, and then Carolina has continued to stay on him. So you would think that they're in it right now.
And I think for Pete, he's a guy that how you described him, Sherrell, is a guy you wouldn't normally associate with UNC. I think usually it's more the long and lean type athletes, but nobody's gonna be calling Kobe Pete soft, no matter where where he goes. And I would probably take the under on that height measurement and the over on the weight. I remember seeing him. I think he had just finished his freshman year, and this was down at Adidas tournament in California. And just looking over, and I mean, he was stronger and more physical than all the rising seniors at that point in time. And I know he's only going to get stronger. I think from a game perspective, you hit the nail on the head. 3-point shooting, I think that's probably the main area of improvement. He was just, I think, 4 of 21 during Adidas AU play in terms of games that were recorded, but he's been playing at the highest levels from a USA basketball perspective, AAU basketball perspective, and has been, leading the Perry team into the state finals over the first 2 years. So he's been playing at the highest levels of competition, and he can do a little bit of everything. So I think you could see in him slot in that 3 to 5 range. But I think you always want to, if you can find an undersized guy that can guard the threes and has that outside ability, but is strong enough to match up. I think that's a really unique recruit or a unique player that you can get just because of that versatility that they could bring offensive and defensively. And definitely seems like UNC has prioritized him coming out of all the top 10 offers that they made in that class.
Maybe Sean May just likes to go to Arizona. I don't know. But it would seem that based on travel and chances to watch Kobe Pete play, I would agree with that, Sean. Sherrell, not much else going on. What is your inclination as to why that's happening?
It's a combination of things, really. They've been done with their class of 2024 for not quite a year. So it was around this time last year that I think we found out that Elliot Cadeau was kind of close to the end of his recruitment. And then about a week after that, James Brown, we found out New Year's Eve night that he was pretty much done with his recruitment, and he announced a couple of days later. And then 2 weeks after that, Ian Jackson committed, and basically they were waiting for Jaron Stevenson to see what he was going to do for the last 6 months, and they haven't particularly recruited anyone else hard in 2024. So that's why it's quiet there. And then in 2025, they've got their offers out. They've had a visitor, but some of those guys are waiting to see who's really serious about them, who's leaving, all those things, because some of them are reclass candidates as well. And as we talked about with the official visit change, you can only take one official visit per school. You can take as many as you want. You want to officially visit 80 schools, you can do it, but you can only go there once. So I think everyone's being a little more strategic in kind of mapping out, is this kid thinking of deciding early? Because if he is, maybe we get him in the fall. But if he's going to decide, next November, then maybe we wait until August to get him to try to officially visit. So there's a little bit of that going on. And then in the background is the transfer portal, because that's changed forever how people are going to build teams. And I think the days, and we wrote this in the weekly scoop this past week, the days of UNC taking 5 and 6 man high school classes is over. That's not going to happen again unless something strange happens. Something very, very strange. I think more than likely the way it's going to be is you're going to identify, you know, 7 or 8 kids that you really like in a high school class with the hopes of getting 2 or 3 of them, and then whatever roster holes you might have moving forward, you fill them with the portal. So add all that together, and there's just not a lot going on with recruiting right now, and UNC being in season. Stuff will pick up, I think, in the next couple of weeks. Maybe we can talk about that on next week's edition, but there'll be some holiday tournaments that have local guys playing, and December, the last 3 weeks, is kind of like a little preview of what July is basically, because there's tournaments and
Yep.
events everywhere across the nation.
Yeah, and y'all, the dude with the spectacles on in this podcast right now is the most sourced up recruiting guy in North Carolina. So if you, and that's only because Dave Tellep is now with the Spurs or wherever it is he is. But if you hear Sherrell say this is why something's happening, go ahead and write it, put it in a letter, mail it to yourself, however you want to make that official. It's pretty much booked. We appreciate that Inside Sherrell. We'll definitely keep our eye on some of those things and see what happens next. Fellas, before we go, you have come to know and love this segment that we used to call 2 cents, but now it's 2 cents brought to you by Congruity. So I'd like you to get your last 2 cents in here before we go home for the evening. And again, if you'd like to save 2 cents or much, much more, get in touch with our friends at Congruity. They handle HR solutions, benefits solutions. Basically, they will help you optimize your small or medium sized business. They have a national brand, but they're locally focused. They're big fans of Inside Carolina. Much like the folks that sponsor any content here, we know you can trust them, or we would not allow them to sponsor our content. So what I'm going to tell you is go to congruityhr/Tar Heels. All right. Go online, congruityhr/Tar Heels. That website will get you a free assessment for your business, and Congruity can tell you how much money they can save you. They can tell you how they're going to do it, and they can tell you how they can make your business better so that you can focus on profitability, sales growth, whatever your capacity desires are in your workplace. They can help you with it. Call them up, check them out. Congruity HR, we appreciate their sponsorship of this here segment. 2 cents before we go home. Sherrell, give me 2 pennies if you would, please, sir.
Drake Powell started his season this past week, 2 games, 2 blowout wins, 2 really good performances. So you like what you see from him. And then I don't know if it's the opponents or just UNC playing faster, but last year, through the first 9 games, UNC had 4 times UNC had games with 70 or fewer possessions. This year, it's only been 1. So that could be who they play. It could be UNC pushing the tempo, but again, back to kind of the style of basketball that Carolina fans have been used to for so long. I think those numbers bear it out that it's closer to that than what we experienced the last few years.
I would say it's probably a combination of all those things, but that is a pretty eye popping stat, because I know North Carolina, and we've talked about it on this show, but North Carolina fans have been excited to see guys with a greater basketball IQ. But then when you combine, the young Elliot Cadeau and his willingness to get the ball forward, that absolutely has to be pushing things. I love to see it bearing out in numerical form. Sean, give me your 2 pennies, please, sir.
All right, I will stay with current players, transfers in terms of Jalen Withers and Cormac Ryan. Both have been talked about a lot on the message boards as well as on the podcast in the past. I think Withers, I think he just needs a big increase in confidence, and I think you could see that in the second half. There was a possession where UNC was in transition, and if he I think, really felt confident. You would have seen him calling for the ball as he was spotting up at the 3-point line. But it was almost like he was running down the floor, just wanting to mix in and not really, you know, stand out from the action. And I think, he's a guy that whether he is that seventh man or what he becomes, they need to get stuff out of him. And I think when he drove hard left, 2 dribbles, kicked out to Ingram, that was a beautiful possession. I think he's done well when he's driven hard and kept it to 2 to 3 dribbles. From a 3-point perspective, I'm not sure really what to expect. I know he shot great last year at Louisville. His shot's been pretty off from 3, but I think if he can, it might not happen against Kentucky, but if they can work to get his confidence up, I think that's going to be really important to what he can hopefully become. Because I think right now a lot of it is just obviously getting used to new teammates, but I think his confidence has been down, and I think you could see that in the second half of the UConn game.
Yeah, he's
And
in
then
a new role. I mean,
yeah,
I'd love that you call that out. Like he's in a new role, and maybe it's that confidence can be found in just understanding what it is he can bring. I mean, I think a lot of people, I know the three of us see him as an energy guy, and his athleticism could absolutely just be an energy injection for this roster. That'll be something interesting to watch. I love that you honed in on that. What's your second penny, sir?
well,
Sorry to step on you.
it, no, I think it is hard when, hey, you might only be getting 1 3-point a game, and everything depends on that. But he there's opportunities for him to create his own confidence, and I think he needs to be more aggressive like he was when he was driving to the basket. Second one, Cormac Ryan 0 for 6 from 3. Were some of his shot attempts too quick? Were they too early in the shot clock? That I think some of those were. I thought UConn actually did a really good job of closing out on those shots because they looked wide open, and then, and it was Spencer and Caravan, so 2 guys you wouldn't expect great closeouts, but I think they made it more contested. From a quickness perspective, I think that's how he shot last year. You can go back and look at how he was shooting at Notre Dame, and he has a very quick release. I think part of it is he fully healthy after that, the Villanova game where he where he tried to miss the free throw and got hurt. So is he getting that same lift on his shot? And I still think at times, and you kind of noticed this last year, but sometimes he tends to lean back or fade away just a little bit versus going straight up and straight down. So I think those are some things to watch for, and I think ways he can get back on track a little bit. Because I think towards the end he was almost trying to aim it in, and you could see when he missed, you could see a lot of the angst come with that. But at the same time, with him, you saw him attack Spencer off the dribble. You saw him make a few nice cuts. So are there other ways where he's not so reliant on having to take 6 or 7 threes if he's not hitting them? But I think with a few tweaks and maybe this longer layoff, hopefully he can provide what UNC needs him to provide.
Yeah, I know Sherrell said that a lot in the post game with Tommy after the UConn game, is that they've got to get more out of Cormac Ryan, and again, it doesn't have to be 20 points a night, but he's got to be a reliable threat to hit 1 or 2 a game, because if not, teams can sag off of him and prevent him from driving, which nobody wants to see that. Guys, I appreciate it as always. I love what y'all bring to the show. Shout out to Johnny T-Shirt for sponsoring. Shout out to Congruity HR for sponsoring us. Appreciate John Siegley producing. Until next time, for Sherrell McMillan, for Sean Moran, I am Joey Powell for the Coast to Coast podcast here on Inside Carolina. We will talk to you very, very soon. Late.